Hey there, friends. I'm back from taking some time off, getting some time with family. Got a lot of time to sleep, actually. So we're back. And um, the biblical passage that was next still had to do with a lot of fighting and a lot of kidnapping. And I just couldn't bring myself to read that today. So we're going to read Esther's story and have a good time talking about it through the lens of what I'm trying to do with this live series, which is looking for passages that talk about sex and marriage, the relationship we call marriage, and any kind of physical harm involving intimate body parts. But I'm pretty sure for this story, it's primarily those first two. So hang tight and we'll get started. So, welcome back. I am happy to be back doing this. So many thoughts running through my mind about everything that's going on in the part of the world from which these texts come. And so I'm going to try to stay focused on what the story is doing and stay focused on the intention of this video series. But I don't want you to think that I'm callous to what's going on today. I just want to focus on this for now. Okay. So there's a lot that could be said, but stay focused on story time for now. Okay. So we're going to read the story of Esther. And so it will be true story time, right? Reading a story and talking about it through this lens. And perhaps you'll find something of interest. By the way, before we launch into the story, I forgot. I wanted to share a couple things. One, I am going live today at 6 p.m. Eastern with a guy I'm pointing down because he lives in Australia. And his name is David McDonald, and he has a YouTube channel podcast called Deep Drinks. So he drinks whatever beverage his guest is drinking. And since it's evening for me, I'll be doing herbal tea. But he is a delightful human being. I'm honored and thrilled to get to talk with him. And we'll be talking about my book that is finally in print, although I don't know if anyone has had their hands on a copy yet, but it is finally in print, Marriage in the Bible. What do the texts say? I'm very excited about that. Also, and the link to that is actually in my community section, my community tab on my channel. If you're interested in following up later or live, whatever. Also, I did a quick little video yesterday about a development that I had nothing to do with. I'm very excited to pass along the news. This has been in the works all year. People have been working on trying to set up this meeting. And so there was a meeting between a woman named Marianne Duddy Burke, who is the executive director of Dignity USA, which is a segment of the Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church, that's working for full inclusion of LGBTQIA folks. So meaning, acknowledging, embracing their sexuality, even their ability to be ordained, which is funny because that will probably happen before women can be ordained. But anyway, it's okay. Whatever. But it's just very exciting. She got to meet with the Pope and told him about the work they're doing. And his response was onward, forward. Yeah, Avanti. You can Google Avanti in Italian. So interesting what that tells us, right? About his own theology versus the predominant laws or regulations, whatever you want to call it, right? The ideas, the things that are in place that he has to respect. Very interesting, right? Wow is right. I'm just putting the link to the Instagram version of that I shared. I think it's pretty exciting. And I'm in conversation with some of the people at Dignity USA, as well as other segments of communities of Catholics around the world who are trying to work on this. So, and they know, at least Marianne knows me and my work, and so does this other woman I kind of connected with. And I'm excited that I'm hopeful that my book might help a little bit in that conversation, since it is directly related to the issue of why members of the LGBTQ community are not allowed. It's really all about sex. who's having it, and to what end. And that is really one of the predominant things that my book, Marriage in the Bible, What Do the Texts Say, ends up addressing. So unbelievable that this even happened, right? That the Pope even said that, right? And then I'm excited and hopeful that I can maybe contribute something positive to that work that is still to be done. So very exciting. Was there something else I need to tell you? I think that's it for now. Very excited. Okay, so let's do Esther. Let me back up on that. Let's talk about the story of Esther. Yeah. So the story of Esther falls into two different categories depending on whether you're Christian or Jewish. And so from a Christian perspective, this is treated like it's put in the chronological section, which is thought of as history, which is one of the reasons why Christians have a hard time understanding often how to read some of their scriptures. They're taught that some of these are historical instead of a little bit more mythological, trying to create some ideas not meant to be taken literally. So from a Christian perspective, it's placed in the narrative tradition about when it would have transpired had it actually happened historically. So that means that it's placed after Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah take place when the people in exile in Babylon and beyond were sent home, those who wanted to go home, which is not all, by the way, those who went back to rebuild Jerusalem, the city wall, the temple, with some of the funds from the Persians to do so. So Ezra and Nehemiah are focused on rebuilding, and the story of Esther then, from a Christian perspective, is planted right after that because it's about people, Jewish people, although they weren't called Jews yet. So the Israelite people in exile in Babylon, and an event, a threat on their life, which again, this is one of the ongoing stories for this group of people and their descendants. So this is also still a tricky story. There's still an element to this that's really disturbing and anyway. What's interesting, I think, for me is that I keep stumbling on passages that are reflecting what's happening today in a sort of way. And so I want to bring that to your attention, that whether you look at this through the lens of humans tend to do the same things over and over, right? Humans in a position of fear or a position of power and feeling threatened, or dominating and wanting to control, whatever the scenario is, that people tend to behave in similar ways over the centuries. So there's that piece of this that we can take away from seeing the parallels. I am of an ilk where I want to highlight and call out the passages that seem to justify having vengefulness in mind or behaving in such a way. And I'd like to cut that off so we can stop being that way. But part of the problem is so many people are taught to make sense of or justify because of a bigger purpose or vision or something. And so that people in faith communities can end up embracing and endorsing ideas that are actually harmful without being aware of it or conscious of it. So this is reading from the Hebrew Bible these last few weeks has turned out to be very complicated for me. So that was longer than I meant that little caveat to be, but I think it's important to note these issues, right? We're going to talk about oh, maybe I should skip this story. Okay. Oh my gosh. Do I skip this story and come back next year? I mean, I'm going to go ahead and do it. I don't know. What do y'all think? I'm seeing comments, but you all are a few seconds behind me. So, yeah. Religious clubs growing up. So trigger warning. How about that? Content warning. The story of Esther has a threat of genocide on one group of people and then ends up perpetuating a small form of it, like not an entire genocide, but the slaughter of thousands of people. So that's part of this story. And I'm going to go ahead and read it. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what my vibe is today. I appreciate that though. Oh, hi, Daryl. Oh, okay. All right, I'm going to do it. Respectfully engaged, but also critically engaged. And one more thing. The biblical scholar Esther Fuchs, Fuchs. I highly recommend her stuff if you're able to access it. She has a piece on Ruth and Esther that I just love. I love her work. And I always think of her when I read this because she highlights that even though Esther is doing some great things, she is still a bit of a puppet. There are questions as to whether or not you want to read Esther as being really fully aware of her power and her subject to authority and power, or is she kind of playing along because she doesn't have any options and she's not really aware of how the systems work and she's just kind of a cog. She still has to be courageous, so there's that. And yet she has to use her body to get things done. So there's that. There's all kinds of layers here. And given the way traditions have tried to focus on the positives, she's courageous. She does, people like Esther Fuchs are, in my opinion, really important because they highlight the problematic elements. And I tend to be in her group because because of the lack of highlighting the problems, right? That some of these things get to go unnoticed or uncommented on. And then in some ways, are perpetuated beyond the need to be perpetuated. Let's get to the story. How about that? This happened in the days of Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus. I just struggle with his name, but anyway, we'll just roll with it. The same Ahasuerus who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. That's a lot. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his officials and ministers. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were present, while he displayed his great wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and pomp of his majesty for many days. 180 days in all. Okay, yeah, that's a long party. This is a fairy tale, right? So yeah, let's pay attention to the fact that it's a fairy tale, and then we'll just, right, you just roll with it, right? It's trying to get at something else. When these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in the citadel of Susa, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days, because that 6-month party wasn't enough, apparently, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings tied with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. It sounds gorgeous, doesn't it? Drinks were served in golden goblets of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Drinking was by flagons, without restraint, for the king had given orders to all the officials of his palace to do as each one desired. And apparently a lot of people like to just forget about life. Numb me about life. Thank you very much. Furthermore, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the palace of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, 6.5 days of partying, when the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Agabtha, Zethar and Carcass, and the 7 eunuchs who attended him, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing the royal crown. And we're supposed to know, and that's all. In order to show the peoples and the officials her beauty, for she was fair to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, conveyed by the eunuchs. At this, the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him. Also, are you all paying attention to the role of eunuchs? I love that my friend Peterson Toscano has pointed this out to me and helped me see this part differently. So we'll get to that in a minute. 7 already named in this story. Then the king consulted the sages who knew the laws For this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and custom. And those next to him were Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marsina, and Memucan, the 7 officials of Persia and Media, who had access to the king and sat first in the kingdom. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs? Then Memucan said, Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only has Queen Vashti done wrong to the king, but also to all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. I mean, that's a lot of power. For this deed of the queen will be made known to all women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands. Excuse me, my English says husbands, on their men. Since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will rebel against the king's officials, and there will be no end of contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be altered, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, vast as it is, all women will give honor to their men, mine says husbands, high and low alike. It is interesting to me, right, that the assumption is if given a chance, women are going to rebel. That should tell you something about the way you perceive men to be behaving. I don't know, right? Like, I just know that when I'm being treated well, I don't have a reason to rebel. You know what I'm saying? Says more about him than anything, doesn't it? Okay, so anyway, so that's what they say. This advice pleased the king, go figure, right? And the officials. And the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script. This took some time, right? And to every people in its own language, declaring that every man should be master in his own house, which is funny because you don't need to proclaim that. That is already the social, economic, political standard, right? So you only have to proclaim that when you're afraid that it's going to be threatened. So funny, right? Which apparently they are. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint commissioners in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in the citadel of Susa, under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetic treatments be given them. And let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. I mean, go figure. He gets to have sex with all these virginal, like all these women who haven't been penetrated yet. Of course he loves this idea, right? Oh my gosh, it's so disgusting. Right? Now, there are, historically speaking, right, there are political reasons to do this, right? It gets you on a good standing with a king when you do this kind of a thing, and it's how alliances are often forged, right? I get that. I'm not trying, but it's just so gross. And I don't think I stopped to think about it that way when I was growing up or when I was, like that he's getting to be the first with all these women, and it's just lovely, right? Okay, let's keep moving. Eunuchs that attended him are basically a harem. Well, no, not really, because eunuchs can also still be It's an interesting question. Eunuchs can still be sexually active. I find that an interesting question. A collection of men who have been castrated are a harem. I'm not sure I'd put it that way, but I'm fascinated by the question. Yes, eunuchs, I do think have for sure because they're male or they're in between male and female in the perception of them, but they are still predominantly male-bodied in cultural contexts perception. So yes, of course. Most of them still have a penis. So yes, they have higher status than women. But because of their interesting in-between status, they are often overlooked and ignored, which gives them in some ways all the more power, right? Because they are present in lots of ways without being noticed. All right. So we're going to keep going. Now, there was a Jew in the citadel of Susa whose name was Mordecai, son of Yair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with the king Jeconiah of Judah, whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had carried away. So we're saying Mordecai is a second generation born in exile, right? Or he's second generation and likely born in exile, I guess we should say. Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his cousin, for she had neither father nor mother. The girl was fair and beautiful, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in the citadel of Susa in custody of Haggai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. We've said this 3 times now. The girl pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with her cosmetic treatments and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen maids from the king's palace, and advanced her and her maids to the best place in the harem. I think these are really interesting little details. Esther did not reveal her people or kindred, for Mordecai had charged her not to tell. Every day, Mordecai would walk around in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. I mean, you got to wonder what made Esther favorable, right, in Haggai's sight. What it was she did or how she looked that made him, I don't know the reasons, but he did favor her. And therefore she did better, right? She was given better treatment. She was getting better food. She was put at the front of the line. She was, metaphorically speaking, and we'll get to it in a second. I loved what my friend pointed out to me about this coming up scene. Okay. So the turn came. This is so gross. It's just so gross. Oh, God. The turn came for each girl to go into King Ahasuerus after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period for their cosmetic treatment. 6 months with oil and myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics for women. That is a long time to just kind of hang out and like get to know each other and whatever while you're waiting to see if you're going to be a good enough lay to make the king happy, right? That's what we're talking about. When the girl, girl, it's the language, right? She probably is a teenager. I don't know. Deep breaths, deep breaths. When the girl went into the king, she was given whatever she asked for to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she went in. Then in the morning, she came back to the second harem in custody of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She did not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as her own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Okay, we're going to pause here for a moment. I love this. Okay, I literally had never noticed any of this because in the past I had always just focused on Esther and what's going on here and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't read the story very often. Let's just be clear about that. What I love about this story is what my friend Peterson Toscano, go look him up. He has a piece called Transfigurations, Transgressing Gender in the Bible. And he does a one man, one woman, one person movie. Well, someone gave him the funding to do a video of it, but I'd seen it live a few times before. And his reading and embodying of this story as Haggai is just fantastic. Okay. So what he highlighted for me, which I hadn't noticed before, is, okay, Haggai, right? He's the king's eunuch. He's the head of all these women and his job is to find a woman who's going to please the king, right? And he takes in a favored one, Esther, and he tells her what to take in with her. Okay. So how does he know what's going to be great for King Ahasuerus, right? So I love the idea, because how would that transpire that Haggai would know the king's fantasy? I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? So yeah, when you're a eunuch, you're not seen as a threat to other males. You're safe in ways that other males are not. Men and women, probably. I mean, and we know that eunuchs, men who'd been castrated, were sometimes sexually involved with both men and women, right? So just picture the scene that Haggai somehow has has the king's attention, or the king is reflecting on things and has had a rough day and he starts fantasizing or wishes he could have something. And all of a sudden he's talking about his sexual fantasies, right? And Haggai hears it. And so he knows what to give Esther to fulfill the king's sexual fantasy, right? It's just not spilled out exactly in the story, but I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Okay. Right? All right, so let's read that part again. When the turn came for Esther, cousin of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter, to go in to the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Right? Now, Esther was admired by all who saw her. She must have been quite beautiful by many people's standards. When Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the other women. Of all the virgins, it just makes me sick to my stomach. She won his favor and devotion, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. She knew what he wanted. That's all we're talking about here, right? Sure. She won his, what does the language say? She won his favor and devotion. It's amazing what men will do when they're being satisfied. And I don't know. I just think it's interesting. Then the king gave a banquet to all his officials and ministers, Esther's banquet. He also granted a holiday or festival to the provinces and gave gifts with royal liberality. I have to see what the comments are saying. Okay, nope, nothing about that. Just saying hi to people who are joining in. That's really sweet. Okay. It just is really disturbing. It's really disturbing to me to keep reading about virgins who were collected, rounded up from every province, beautiful virgins who were all being forced to have sex with the king. It's just one night after another, like it just. When the virgins were being gathered together, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Now, Esther had not revealed her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai, just as when she was brought up by him. She's a good, obedient daughter. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. But the matter came to the knowledge of Mordecai, And he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, both the men were hanged on the gallows. It was recorded in the book of the Annals in the presence of the king. So Mordecai has some good, he's got some good love going for him here. After these things, I need to fix my hair. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman. I really should look up these names in the Hebrew so I do a better job with them. Sorry about that. I'm going to go with Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down in obeisance to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or do obeisance. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" When they spoke to him day after day and he would not listen to them, they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would avail, for he told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or do obeisance to him, Haman was infuriated. Oh, my hair looks hilarious. That's so funny. This is my swimming hair, like I just went for a swim and let it dry. That's just funny. Okay. Looks better if I dry it, but I didn't. Okay. Haman was infuriated, but he thought it beneath him to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So, having been told who Mordecai's people were, dun, 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 Haman plotted to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. So now's when we're going to suspend, we're going to pretend that there isn't this horrible thing going on over in the region of Palestine and Israel right now, because if I do, I have to stop reading because I just can't. So we're just going to keep going with the story. And again, if you weren't here at the beginning and you're just joining us, I did take a moment to talk about this, the fact that there are some parallels between this story and what's happening right now. Thank you, Casey. And it is unsettling to me to read about it. And yet I'm going to keep reading because it's all part of the point. Some of the points I'm trying to make as a biblical scholar is that this is in these sacred texts, and mixed in with attempts to destroy the people of Israel are also attempts to slaughter a whole bunch of other people, or protecting the people of Israel. It means slaughtering a whole bunch of Egyptians and things like that. Those are all a part of these texts. And the vengefulness and hatefulness, really, of all these things bothers me. Whether it's that it's in sacred writings, that really bothers me, and it fuels so much of what's still going on. So we're going to just suspend reality a little bit and keep reading if I can. Okay. So Haman is out to get all the Jews in this story. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, so this is, 9 years have passed, they cast Pur, which means the lot, before Haman for the day and for the month. And the lot fell on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and separated among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not appropriate for the king to tolerate them." This is a very interesting interpretation, by the way, of their laws, which don't necessarily say that, but Mordecai just had an issue. I don't know. "If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued for their destruction. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, so that they may put it into the king's treasuries." So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to Haman, "The money is given to you and the people as well. To do with them as it seems good to you." And the king's secretaries were summoned on the 13th day of the first month. And an edict, according to all that Haman commanded, was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all the provinces and to the officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's ring. Letters were sent by courtiers to all the king's provinces, giving orders to young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation, calling on all the peoples to be ready for that day. The couriers, I might not be able to go. I might have to skip over all this and just focus on Esther. The couriers went quickly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, as you do right before you unfurl a genocide. But the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. When Mordecai learned that all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went through the city, wailing with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province, wherever the king's command and his decree came, there was great mourning because of the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and most of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai. "Get dressed, you fool!" so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai and learn what was happening and why. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of this people. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther, explain it to her, and charge her to go to the king to make supplication to him and entreat him for her people. And this is where we get that saying you may have heard. It's coming up. Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a message for Mordecai. What is going on here? Something's weird here today. Oh, no. I take some time off and things get crazy. Okay. Then Esther spoke with Hathach and gave him a message for Mordecai, saying, "All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law. All alike are to be put to death." I'm not supposed to do this. In other words, only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone may that person live. I myself have not been called to come to the king for 30 days because he's got plenty of other women lined up, to meet his needs. When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply, "Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the others. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this." You may have heard that phrase, "for such a time as this." It's always interesting to me that we can take a line that has really interesting meaning out of context, and it's nice to kind of refer to, but wow, in context, it's pretty intense. Then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will also fast, as you do. After that, I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." I'm dying either way, right? Mordecai then went away and did as Esther had ordered him. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace opposite the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne inside the palace, opposite the entrance to the palace. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor, and he held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. She must have been drop-dead gorgeous. Or he just reminded him of his first night with her, and he just, let's go do that again, baby. I don't know. Esther approached and touched the top of the scepter. The king said, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even to the half of my kingdom." And she said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for the king." And the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther desires. Come, come." So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. While they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Esther said, "This is my petition and request. If I have won the king's favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare for them, and I will do as the king has said." It's tricky business. Haman went out that day happy and in good spirits. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, he observed that he neither rose nor trembled before him. He was infuriated with Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Then he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the ministers of the king. Haman added, "Even Queen Esther, let no one but myself come with the king to the banquet that she prepared. Tomorrow, also uninvited by her, together with the king. Yet all this does me no good, so long as I see the Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." And his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go with the king to the banquet in good spirits." This pleased him. And he had the gallows made, as you do, overnight. On that night, the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of records, the annals, and they were read to the king. That's an interesting way to be put to sleep, isn't it? It was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, and who had conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" The king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." "Well, who is in the court?" Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So the king's servants told him, "Well, Haman is there, standing in the court. Well, let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What shall be done?" I'm just now seeing the question from a couple minutes ago. Sorry, Carrie Ann. Were they still referring to the women as virgins? Oh, you mean the ones in the concubinage? What do you mean? Sorry, that was a couple minutes ago. Say it again, or come back to it again, or even raise it at the end. I'm going to do some questions at the end. Haman came in. King said, "What shall be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor?" So Haman doesn't know who the king's talking about, and he thinks he's talking about him, right? Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king wish to honor more than me?" So Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king wishes to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, with a royal crown on its head, as you do. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let him robe the man whom the king wishes to honor, and let him conduct the man on horseback through the open square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Quickly, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to the Jew Mordecai, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned." It's fantastic, isn't it? So Haman took the robes and the horse and robed Mordecai and led him riding through the open square, proclaiming, "Thus shall it be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor." And Mordecai returned to the king's gate. But Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. When Haman told his woman, my English's wife, told his woman Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his advisors and his woman Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom your downfall has begun, is of the Jewish people, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him." It's a very interesting claim to make, isn't it? While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman off to the banquet that Esther had prepared. The veiled ones were seen as deities inhabiting women. The deities didn't have any visual representation, just women veiled, possibly ties of covering up of women. So you're asking if women in harems were called virgins? No, they're not. They're just young women now. The use of Betula is not being used anymore. Once they've visited the king, they have been touched, penetrated. They are no longer virginal. They have now been marked. Right? No. So the king and Haman went in to feast with King Esther on the second day as they were drinking wine. I mean, that's, again, these are long feasts, right? On the second day, as they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." And Queen Esther answered, "If I have won your favor, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me. That is my petition. And the lives of my people, that is my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have held my peace. But no enemy can compensate for this damage to the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he and where is he who has presumed to do this?" Esther said, "A foe, an enemy, this wicked Haman." And Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. The king rose from the feast in wrath and went into the palace garden, but Haman stayed to beg his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that the king had determined to destroy him. When the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, after having cooled off a bit perhaps, Haman had thrown himself on the couch where Esther was reclining. So it looked like he's attacking her, right? And the king said, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence? In my own house?" As the words left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "Look, the very gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, stands at Haman's house, 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on that." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the anger of the king abated. I feel like I might need to skip over some of what's coming up. I'm going to stick to the part about what Esther is saying and doing, partly because of time and partly because I don't want to read about a small genocide. I just don't. So let me just stick to the things where Esther is speaking and doing things. And I think I need to just leave it up to you, right? I always do in general. She's a young woman, but she's living in the palace and she didn't know these things were happening. She had to be told by someone outside the palace. Like, does she not have a good gossip circle going on in the palace to know what's going on? Like, why did she have to be told about that this was developing? This is one of the things that Esther Fuchs wants to point out about this story, that though courageous, she was a little naive and clueless. She wasn't in touch with what was going on. Okay, right? I think you can read that either way. As a biblical scholar wanting to highlight things about the Bible and some of the problematic elements, it is utterly unsettling to me the way women are objects in this story. Right? And the way we're reading about a king getting to have just dozens, maybe hundreds of conquests here, right? Just for the sake of finding one that pleases him. These are the elements that I'm trying to focus on in this story time. How are women being portrayed? How is this element of sex or this utterly male, man-made category called virgin, right? Virginity isn't really a thing, right? But it is, biblically speaking, and it's all about controlling women's bodies. It's all about access to women's bodies and who gets to have it. It's about territorialism, mastering women, having control over them, marking them as your territory. That's this language of virgin is only relevant for females in the biblical texts all the way up until the book of Revelation. Virgin in biblical texts is a category that is applied only to females. If you want to talk about a male in such a way, you have to qualify that you're talking about a male such person. But you don't have to qualify that you're talking about female such person because the category itself is defined in relation to female bodies. This concept of a female body status changing because a penis enters her is so pervasive in Western cultures, or maybe I should say in the United States. And it is, there's been a lot of harm done in the name of labeling women's bodies this way. So I guess this is my way of trying to pull back from the genocides involved, or the threat of genocides involved in the story, is to remind us of why we're reading this, why we're doing story time at all here. And to remind, to highlight that Esther is courageous, but note that she wins his favor by being beautiful or by being seductive, by pleasing him. She wins his favor by being beautiful. And so, and sexually alluring for him, whatever that means for him. So, it's what she had it to use, right? So good for her, right, for using it. But there's an element of that then that perpetuates, because what I hear is that a lot of men are, not all men, but men, some men tend to think with that part of their body. I don't know. So that this concept of women being manipulative or needing to be seductive in some way to get what they want ends up being this weird self-fulfilling prophecy of some sort, like that's, that ends up working. So people do it, even if you'd really rather not. And systems are set up to facilitate that, right? I mean, when you start talking about the way this still goes on today, women in the very hetero framed situation, which I don't think of people as strictly hetero, but I know that a lot of the Me Too movement, for instance, was very hetero oriented, not solely. Um, I mean, we see this still happening, right? We're not so far removed from this ancient way of behaving and thinking, right? We're not actually. So that's why I read these stories. And I think I want to end on this because right, it makes women untrustworthy. All kinds of things, right? And the objectification of female bodies because of this. So on so many levels, I feel like I'm a broken record when it comes to just pointing out these things, right? But I need to do it. I do feel the need to keep doing it. I do feel the need to keep pointing out that there are so many passages in this thing, this collection that's thought of as sacred and holy, that undermine healthy human relationships till today. Like, these stories are in the theological framework or tapestry or something, and these examples of women having to do something with their body, use their bodies, not their minds, not their gifts, right? Use their bodies to get what needs to happen done. It's just really disturbing to me, and it's troubling to me. It's troubling. So she does manage to actually flip the script. That I'm going to just point this out, that instead of it being the Jews who are targeted, there's a flip, and they are actually allowed to go after other people instead. So this story from Esther is referred back to every year. Purim is one of the festivals, one of the holidays from within a Jewish calendar. And it's this story, okay? And whether it's the highlights of a story or the whole thing, they will be read as they celebrate each of these holidays. So I am troubled by how many passages in this collection that's referred to as sacred and holy valorize war, valorize slaughtering other people. I don't care that the point of the story was to show that Yahweh's stronger and bigger and badder and better. I don't care, because it's awful. If you have to skirt around a part of your stories, part of your scripture, because it's not helpful anymore, maybe you should find a different set of stories. I don't know. So, couple minutes. Do we have any particular questions? There's some really interesting comments. I'm sorry, the look on my face. Interesting comments in the live chat today. Any questions that anyone wants to ask at this point? I am inclined to wrap it up, but wanted to wait to see if there were any specific questions that weren't answered, things that need to be raised. Oh, someone commented, I do wonder if any of those events ever happen, and I don't think so. There's no, not that I'm aware of, there is no record of this actually happening. Right? So it is a fairy tale on a certain level. It is trying to communicate something. I think theologically speaking, if you can pull back from it, we are trying to say something about, well, and that becomes another question too, because the God of the Israelites is never mentioned in this story anywhere. Right. So is God back in Jerusalem in their minds? Which is possible, by the way, in terms of how people talked about and thought about God's living or dwelling in certain areas, right? This is pre thinking of God as all encompassing in all of everything or all the universe or whatever. So, was God back in Jerusalem? Couldn't hear them. Is it a story that's meant indirectly to talk about, you know, God's people will be protected, even though God isn't actually called upon at all in the story? It almost didn't make the canon because of this issue of there being no reference to God. All kinds of interesting things, but I think ultimately there's an element of the threat on our lives that's a part of this story that makes it, I think, part of what made it important, at least initially. Also, and because of historically speaking, I think this is where, this is where I want to take all these steps backwards and say, let's drop the specific labels and names and let's talk about the people that lived in this territory. Okay. This was an important segment of a very important trade route. Not just the Silk Road, because the Silk Road went mostly north of them, but this trade route in terms of, from the east down to Egypt, or this was an important segment. Access to salt. Salt was incredibly important. In fact, I haven't read it, but there's a guy who's claimed that we wouldn't have the Newer Testament if it hadn't been for all the salt in the Dead Sea. That region, the importance of the salt is what played into the story. I wish I'd had time to read it because I'm interested in what he discovered that I don't know of. The point is, this is a segment of the world that has been trounced upon multiple times over the centuries and prior to Jesus coming into the picture, right? We have multiple empires and groups of people conquering or taking over some form of control of the people in that part of the world. Again, drop all the names and labels. If you live in that part of the world, you too might want to have some stability. You might want to have the ability to stand up on your own, claim a piece of land for yourself, be established enough as a group of people that other nations would respect you instead of coming in and conquering you and slaughtering half the people and carrying other half or another fourth off into exile. Am I making sense here? I think the very real lives that have been in that part of the world, regardless of their religious or ethnic identity, that's the thing that is true for millennia, is the people living there have been threatened always, because it's such an important piece of land for trade routes and for peoples, for empires wanting to control things and resources. And so the threat to their existence is what has never changed. That is what makes that piece of the world the focus of this set of stories. That's why that's the thing that's still true. That's what we're still watching play out, is the threat to existence over this land for various reasons that have developed in the last 2,500 years that are different, perhaps, than initially. But that's why I see a story like Esther actually still having some relevance, which is our people have struggled to survive for lots of reasons, or struggled to have our own claim on a piece of land. Stable and just society is the ultimate goal. Exactly. And it is difficult to achieve, much less sustain, when you are such a small group of people and when you have access to such important resources, right? So that has, again, choose your place on the planet where that last line applies, right? Resources. So that's what I think about when I think about the current struggles, there's a very real ancient struggle here. And I think it helps, at least it helps me if I think about that reality that is being given stories and given a voice. This threat on our existence is real, whatever their names are, whoever they are, whatever religious tradition they are a part of at the time. That is a very real thing. And so it doesn't justify flipping the script. It doesn't, none of that, but that helps me at least to have some empathy for this people, because I have such a hard time with so many of their stories. And I like their stories, but so that's my thought. I appreciate that question, James. And yeah, this particular set of events did not unfold, but similar ones did, right? Or similar threats to their existence happened. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. Those of you who wanted to be and were able to be, thank you so much for watching. Those of you who are watching, I want to say I'm thrilled to let you know again that my latest book is finally in print. I haven't gotten my hands on a copy yet, but I'm excited that will be here any day. My latest book, Marriage in the Bible, What Do the Texts Say? You can still get a discount on the publisher website if you're interested in that. And so the discount code I just put in the comments, RLFANDF, Roman and Littlefield, friends and family, 30%. I'm just very excited, and I'll be going live with deep drinks this evening. So, and then I have all other interviews I'm lining up to talk about the books. I'm very excited about that, and I appreciate you supporting me in the various ways that you do, like showing up here to chat, telling other friends about some of the videos that you've liked, subscribing, liking videos, passing them along, all the different ways, supporting me through Patreon, supporting me through purchasing my second book, which is Permission Granted, Take the Bible into Your Own Hands. The Audible of that, I get most of the funds from that. All the different things you do to support me and telling other people about the stuff I'm doing. I appreciate it. So thank you for that. And it is Tuesday, right? I'll be back on Thursday. Thanks.